In 1939, the truck was a supporting act. Freight moved by rail. Trucks handled the last few miles the delivery from the station to the door. Useful? Replaceable? Nobody thought of them as the backbone of anything. 6 years later, that was gone. By 1945, trucks had moved armies across continents. They had kept entire nations fed and supplied. They had proven something the railroads never could, and the world's freight system was rebuilt around them. The strange part? Almost none of that was planned. The single most important decade in trucking history happened because of a war that had nothing to do with hauling freight. Here's how it actually happened. Start with where trucking stood. Before the war, by the late 1930s, the roads had improved. Paving had spread. Route 66 and the numbered highways existed. Trucks were more reliable than the hand-cranked machines of the 1920s. But the railroads still owned freight. Long-haul trucking existed, but it was the underdog. Trucks were smaller, weaker, and limited. They filled gaps the rail network couldn't reach, and there was one problem nobody had solved. Trucks needed roads. Take away the road, and a truck was useless. That single limitation is what the war would destroy. Because, in a war, there are no roads. Which brings us to the vehicle that changed everything. The GMC CCKW. Drivers called it the Deuce and a half, after its 2.5-ton rating. It doesn't look impressive. Flat green paint, canvas top, no comfort of any kind. But it had something almost no civilian truck had at the time. 6-wheel drive. Power to every axle. Which meant it didn't need a road. It could climb mud, sand, gravel, snow, riverbeds, bomb craters terrain that would have stopped a commercial truck in its first mile. America built over 800,000 of them. Alongside it came the Jeep Small, light, and capable of going nearly anywhere. And behind both, an entire generation of heavy trucks built to a single standard, in numbers no industry had ever attempted. The factories that made cars stopped making cars. They made trucks instead, on assembly lines running around the clock. And every one of those trucks was teaching engineers the same lesson. Build it tough enough, and the road stops mattering. Then came the moment that proved it. June 1944. The Allies land at Normandy. Within weeks, they break out of the beachhead and start moving east across France faster than anyone predicted. That should have been good news. It was a crisis. The armies were advancing hundreds of miles from their supply base. The French rail network had been bombed to rubble by the Allies themselves before the invasion. Ports were damaged or still in enemy hands. Frontline divisions were burning through fuel, ammunition, and food faster than it could reach them. Some units were close to stopping entirely, not because of the enemy, but because of empty tanks. There was only one way to move supplies fast enough. Trucks. What they built in response was called the Red Ball Express. It ran from late August into November of 1944. At its peak, nearly 6,000 trucks were moving on it. They created a dedicated one-way loop of roads, closed to all other traffic, marked with red ball signs so drivers could follow the route without maps. Trucks ran day and night in long convoys, often with headlights blacked out, on roads never designed for that kind of weight or volume. Drivers ran punishing shifts. Trucks broke down and were pushed aside so the line could keep moving. Some units drove until they fell asleep at the wheel. And here's the part that deserves to be said clearly. Roughly 3/4 of the drivers on the Red Ball Express were African American soldiers. In a segregated army that largely barred them from combat roles, these men were assigned to transport and then handed the responsibility of keeping an entire advancing army supplied. They drove exhausted, under air attack risk, on collapsing roads for months. In under 3 months, the Red Ball Express moved hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies to the front. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. It burned enormous quantities of fuel just to deliver fuel. And it worked. It proved something that permanently changed how the world thinks about freight. When speed matters more than anything else, trucks win. The same lesson was being learned on the other side of the continent, in a way most people have never heard about. Through the Lend-Lease program, the United States shipped enormous quantities of trucks to the Soviet Union. Hundreds of thousands of them. Studebakers and other heavy vehicles delivered across oceans and mountain routes. The Red Army had tanks. What it lacked was the ability to keep those tanks fed and moving. American trucks gave it exactly that. Soviet commanders openly credited that mobility as a decisive factor in their advances. An army that can move its supplies faster than the enemy can move theirs is an army that wins ground it otherwise couldn't hold. Two different fronts, two different armies. The same conclusion. Wars are won by logistics, and logistics, from that point on, meant trucks. Then the war ended, and that's when the effects came home. Three things happened almost at once. First, the machines. Every hard lesson learned on battlefields became civilian engineering. All-wheel drive, stronger frames, better multi-speed transmissions built for heavy loads, improved braking systems, synthetic rubber tires, developed at scale because natural rubber supplies had been cut off during the war. Peacetime trucks were suddenly built to standards that would have seemed absurd in 1938. Second, diesel. Before the war, gasoline dominated. Military use exposed diesel's real advantages under load: better fuel economy, more torque, and far longer engine life. In the decades after 1945, heavy trucking shifted decisively to diesel, the engine that still powers nearly every long-haul truck on Earth. Third, and most overlooked, the drivers. Millions of servicemen had been trained to operate, maintain, and repair heavy trucks. They came home with a skill that was suddenly in enormous demand. Some went to work for freight companies. Many bought surplus military trucks cheaply, painted over the olive drab, and started hauling for themselves. The independent owner-operator, one man, one truck. One business exploded in numbers after 1945, largely because of this. An entire profession was created by demobilization, and the industry itself grew at a speed nobody was ready for. Freight that had always moved by rail started moving by road. Manufacturers realized a truck could deliver directly to a factory door on a schedule, without transferring cargo between systems. Shippers cared less about the cost per ton, and more about how fast it arrived. Trucking companies that had been small regional operators before the war expanded into national carriers within a decade. Truck stops multiplied along the new routes. Whole towns reoriented themselves toward the highway instead of the rail line. The railroads didn't disappear, but they lost their monopoly on distance, and they never got it back. But the biggest change of all came from one man's memory. Back in 1919, a young officer named Dwight Eisenhower joined a U.S. Army convoy attempting to cross the United States coast to coast to test whether it could be done. It took them about 2 months. Bridges collapsed under the vehicles. Trucks sank in mud. Roads simply ended. He never forgot it. Then, during the war, Eisenhower saw the German Autobahn network wide, engineered, high-speed roads that let vehicles and supplies move across a country at a pace America couldn't match. He put those two experiences together. In 1956, as president, Eisenhower signed the legislation that created the interstate highway system. And its official name matters. It was the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act. Defense? The interstate system was justified and funded as a military project, a network to move troops, equipment, and supplies quickly in a national emergency, and to evacuate cities if it came to that. It was never primarily designed as a gift to the trucking industry. But that's exactly what it became. Wide lanes, gentle grades, strong bridges, no traffic lights, routes connecting nearly every major city in the country. The modern American trucking industry, the long-haul freight economy, the truck stops, the entire logistics system was built on top of a highway network designed with tanks in mind. So, look at the whole arc. In 1939, trucks were a supporting act to the railroads. The war forced them off the road entirely and made them go anywhere. It built them by the hundreds of thousands. It proved on 2 continents that freight speed decides outcomes. It trained a generation of men to drive and fix them. It handed the industry diesel engines, stronger drivetrains, and synthetic tires. And then, it left behind a continent-spanning highway system built for national defense that trucking would use for the next 70 years. None of it was designed for commercial freight. All of it transformed commercial freight forever. That's the pattern that keeps repeating in this industry. The biggest leaps forward almost never come from the industry asking for them. They come from somewhere else entirely: a war, a law. A road in trucking adapts faster than anyone expects. So the next time you watch a semi pull onto an interstate ramp, remember what you're actually looking at. A diesel engine proven in war. A drivetrain designed for battlefields. A road built to move an army. And a profession largely staffed, in its most important decade, by men who learned the job in uniform. They didn't set out to build modern trucking. They just had a war to win. Everything else came after.